It is the hardest thing I have ever been through in my life. And my mother took her own life by suicide. So that's pretty hard. This was and continues to be equally almost as hard because it's a static feeling of a weight lifted off my body, just an excitement about, oh my God, this is so right for me, and enormous grief at the loss of my marriage and the security of heterosexuality and sadness it might bring to the three people I love the most in the world. I'm not sorry. And I'm thankful that I've realized, because I am much calmer in my body than I've ever been in my whole life. But it's not easy.
Welcome to Grain Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and the goal of Grain Rainbows is to help you feel less alone wherever you happen to be on your journey. I especially appreciate those of you who have taken the time to write to me at grainrainbows@gmail.com, because one reason I started this podcast was my own need for connection. Those of you who have been listening since Grain Rainbows launched in 2018 know that the show has evolved from a focus on LGBT history and resources to a focus on personal stories. This has been intentional because I have learned that, just like me, listeners connect with the stories. Hosting Grain Rainbows has reinforced a lesson I actually first learned back in 2006 when I started podcasting. I had an idea of who I thought would be listening, but the audience is more diverse than I expected. I only mention this because if you are new to the show, I want you to feel welcome, no matter what your age or how you identify. Before I jump into this month's interview, I want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Grain Rainbows at grainrainbows.com. And you can subscribe for free in your favorite podcasting app. As I mentioned, you can send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com. You can submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/DocArtemis, or you can post to the Grain Rainbows fan page on Facebook. We have moved our private Facebook group to MeWe.com for better privacy. If you're interested in this, just email me at grainrainbows@gmail.com. Also, I finally have the email newsletter set up. This will allow you to get show notes automatically so that you never miss an episode. To sign up, just go to grainrainbows.com or text Grain Rainbows, all one word spelled with an A, no space, to 33777. That's Grain Rainbows, all one word, to 33777. Finally, I want to remind you that I'm always looking for people who are willing to share their stories. And I particularly want to reach out to those of you who may not have had a chance to share your stories with others. One reason personal storytelling is so powerful is that both the speaker and the listeners can be changed and empowered. Again, just email me at grainrainbows@gmail.com. This month's guest is very early on her journey, but rather than say more, I'm going to just jump right in. Tress, it is great to have you on Grain Rainbows. I appreciate you coming on to share your story. Would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and then share your story in whatever way you'd like?
Okay. I'm 53 years old. I am a lifelong ESL teacher, English as a second language. I grew up in Minnesota, but I spent about 15 years abroad in Japan, China, Federated States of Micronesia, Abu Dhabi, and the United Arab Emirates. And I'm just back to Minnesota about 4 years ago after being away for 30 years. I have two children. I have a teenage son who's 15 and a daughter who is 13. And I'm in the process of getting a divorce from my husband of 20 years. And so should I share my story of discovering that I'm queer or?
Yeah, I mean, that's where people usually like to start, is
Yeah.
just going
Yeah.
back and saying, how you
Sure.
ended up in your marriage and then figured out, or most women don't have a clue and get married because we
Right.
don't know any better.
Right. Well, I'll just start with quickly last summer and then I'll just backtrack. So last summer, I had a friend from the YWCA a woman that I became friends with about, 2.5 years ago at the Y. We went to the same exercise class and we both had sons who were 15 and became friends. And I knew she was queer. I'd had other queer friends in my life. But about 9 months ago, I found myself, I don't know, just thinking about her in between class and kind of aware of like, oh, is she coming to class today? And then one night we went out dancing with my sister and her sister. And, we really were good friends. We worked out. We had a lot of things in common. We talked all the time. But at the end of the night, and we used to give each other hugs, but she put her hands on my hips and said, "Ooh, we should go out dancing again sometime." And my body went crazy. I just, head to toe, I thought, uh-oh, this is a problem. But I'm fairly open sexually. I always have been my whole life, and just really open and really liberal. So I thought, well, I'm often attracted to a lot of different people. Anyway, so so time went on, and I just found myself thinking about her more and more and more. And last July, we went out dancing again, and I initiated a physical relationship with her, and went home and told my husband. And he said, "Well, does she want to sleep with you?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." But I was thinking, of course, I want to sleep with her. But in that male way, and my husband and I are quite open as well. He said, "Sure, go ahead." It's just so sexualized in our society, I think, two women together. And so I did, with his permission. And that just kind of opened up a Pandora's box. And so I came home and I spoke to my husband, and we decided that we would try to have an open relationship. The understanding was that we could have an open relationship and I could spend time with her, and he possibly would spend time with other people, as long as we could keep each other primary. And we did a lot of research about polyamory, which we had both run across before, but we hadn't explored as a couple, and open relationships, and bought all the books and read all the blogs. And I continued to sleep with my friend, whose name is Eli. And my husband and I started having talks that we had never had in 15, 20 years. So we thought our relationship was blooming, and isn't that fantastic? But I knew that I was becoming very emotionally involved with Eli. And my husband could kind of see it as well. And so he said, "Okay, let's put the brakes on that. Would you be willing to take a break from seeing her? And we can focus on our relationship, get our relationship really strong, and then we'll open it up again." And I said, "Sure." And I honestly believed I could do that. I really took my marriage vows very seriously and consider myself a person of integrity and honesty and respect and compassion. And I kept sleeping with her. I mean, Ginger, you don't know me, your listeners don't know me, but this is not who I am. This is not what I do. But I honestly felt like I couldn't control myself. And it was just so extraordinary to me. And there were so many feelings. I almost felt justified in doing this. It was really like something I've never experienced before. And all I can say is I really felt like there was some part of me that knew better, that was acting through me. Even the night when I initially approached her about a physical relationship, I literally was like I was outside my body, watching myself say and do these things, thinking, what is going on? Because I never would have cheated on my husband with a man, ever. There was men I was attracted to, but I just thought, oh, I could never do that. I could never live with myself. So of course my husband found out through a long series and a lot of discussions and a lot of tears. It just became clear to us that our marriage was incompatible because I am gay. And that took a long time to come to. The really confusing part, and I think it's not uncommon, I don't know, from what I've heard, is we don't have a bad marriage. We don't fight. We get along. We love each other. We have the same values. We have the same politics. We have the same sense of humor. And we have 20 years of shared experience of living abroad and raising two children and beautiful, tender moments. and I'm gay. And so this all happened about 9 months ago. And over the 9 months, we've both realized also what our relationship was missing. And most definitely the physical and emotional intimacy was missing. And, first we thought it was, we have two young kids. And then I thought it was me because of whatever childhood issues, or him, childhood issues. We're both very independent people. Or I was always, quote unquote, tired. Or he was kind of depressed and I was always on overdrive, and all of these kinds of things. It's just so clear to me now. It's not the right gender, possibly, energy, something for me physically. And I have spent a lot of time adding up my past and examining past relationships, because I feel terribly guilty that it took me, quote unquote, this long to realize this. I feel exhilarated about what I've discovered. I feel exhilarated in my relationship with Eli, but I feel terrible at the collateral damage to my children and my husband because of it. And that part is very, very, very hard to reconcile.
Well, I'm really glad that you shared this, because I think there's probably going to be a lot of listeners who can identify in various ways with various parts of your story. When I talk to somebody who has a bad marriage and they can't seem to separate out the fact that their marriage is bad from the fact that they figured out that they're gay, and they guilt themselves when they could just go, this marriage is bad. It's amazing the people who are married to little boys, right?
Yeah.
And they're taking care of these little boys, and they're guilting over, oh, well, I'm going to abandon my little boy who demands that he be taken care of. But when you're in a situation like yours where you are married to a good man, and it's a whole different level of distress, I would think. I mean, I'm saying different. I don't mean more or less. I just mean different.
And certainly we both, he and myself, separately and together, have tried to figure out, because he was depressed. I was controlling. It was a codependent relationship. There were things that if we were to stay together, we would have had to address. And we just don't know, did those happen because we weren't emotionally intimate, because I'm gay? Were those things there and I'm gay? I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But I think in some ways, it's easy for us to justify to ourselves and to our kids, well, mom's gay, we can't be married. We're both perfect people. It was a perfect marriage. Isn't this? Do you know what I'm trying to say too?
Yeah. That probably doesn't matter to your kids, though. Probably to them, the thing that matters is you're getting divorced.
Yes. And I think for my husband, in some ways, it was a very big question of whether I was going to come out to the kids at the same time as telling them about the divorce. And first I was adamant no. And he was really pressuring me to tell them. And I know it's because he didn't want them to possibly blame him, because I did, quote unquote, do more. They knew that I did more of the housework and I did more of, So in the end, I decided to tell them everything. And for me, it was the correct decision. It was just really good to tell them about myself and what was true. And I think it did relieve them of trying to figure out who was at fault or who was negligent in the relationship. And I don't know how much teens would have done that, not having a context of a relationship themselves. But everything's out in the open, so that feels much better.
Yeah, well, I can tell you this. My parents split up when I was about 17.
Yeah.
So I can tell you from my experience, I had very definite ideas about who was to blame. And it took me a long time to realize that it takes two. I mean, I was probably in my 30s before I realized the parent I was blaming wasn't the sole,
Yeah, I was 10 and I absolutely blamed my mother. But to kind of round out the story and just to give a little background too, I spent a long, long time trying to figure out how long has this been true for me. And in my 20s, when I was living abroad in Japan, I had a relationship with a woman, a kind of a relationship as much as you could have in your 20s. This would have been in the early 90s. And so not nearly the attitude of today, with homosexuality being so much more accepted. And I came home for Christmas and my mother was a very crunchy granola liberal woman. And she had mental illness. So we were super close, but And so I just kind of innocently said to her, hey, Mom, guess what? There's this woman, Nicole, and I've kind of started seeing her and I'm considering having a relationship with her. And we talked about everything. And I thought she would think that was interesting or fun or ask me about it. And she got very cold and she said, what? And she completely shamed me and said, that's sick. I can't believe you're doing that. I tried that once. You must never see her again. And, it just surprised me and just caught me off guard. And it was extremely difficult. And of course, I kept seeing this woman. And then my mother would call me in Japan and say, you're not having those thoughts about women again, are you? I often think if that hadn't happened, what would I have done? Because then after I moved home from Japan, this feeling didn't go away. But it was also the time of women can claim their sexuality and women can ask men out and women can admit that they're sexual and they want sex and you could ask for it. And so I was kind of pushing the boundaries and exploring everything. And I went out to ladies' nights in Boston once in a while by myself looking around, but I never really pursued any. I even went to Provincetown by myself one night.
Wow.
living in Boston, intending to quote unquote hook up. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to use a woman the way men have used me my whole life. So that kind of petered out. I guess it was important to me to clarify to myself, my kids, my husband, that this was not a midlife crisis. It was not bored housewife. It was not just bored of my heterosexual marriage. And this was not capricious in any way. When I realized the depth of my feelings and how true it was for me and how long it had been going on, and consequently that it would mean the end of my marriage, it is the hardest thing I have ever been through in my life. And my mother took her own life by suicide. So that's pretty hard. This was and continues to be equally almost as hard because it's a static feeling of a weight lifted off my body, just an excitement about, oh my God, this is so right for me, and enormous grief at the loss of my marriage and the security of heterosexuality and sadness it might bring to the three people I love the most in the world. I'm not sorry. And I'm thankful that I've realized, because I am much calmer in my body than I've ever been in my whole life. But it's not easy.
So what, at this point in your journey, do you see as the biggest surprise?
One of the biggest surprises for me, and I hope this is not too much for your listeners, but I spent a lot of time with scales, and one side was straight and one side was queer. And every day I'd put little pebbles on one side or the other. And I'd be looking at a picture like Megan Rapinoe, ooh, pebble on the queer side, And at the end of the day, I'd be like, well, I'll be damned, I'm still queer. But one of the biggest eye-opening experiences for me was, one of the confusing things for my husband is that I was not one of those women that recoiled from the touch of a man. It was ostensibly pleasurable for me to be with my husband. He knew me and he knew my body, and my body responded, and I did things for him. But it always felt very performative. And it always kind of felt like, well, this is what you do because, you love the other person, you're going to do this for them. But I can say that when I am with my girlfriend, I get as much pleasure from doing things for her as the reverse. For the first time in my life, I thought, wow, this is desire. And of course, it's not all about sex. It's so much bigger than that, which is, I'd say, the also second biggest surprise. But I just didn't know. I thought I enjoyed sex, but I just didn't know really how much deeper and how pleasurable it all could be. And not that I was questioning, I really wasn't, but that was very significant to me to realize that.
This is something that comes up sometimes when I talk to people about the whole issue of, especially for us as women, because this doesn't seem to happen to men, although I could be wrong, that we can know and figure out that we're gay without actually having a relationship. And it sounds like you thought about it, but the relationships sealed the deal.
Yes.
So could you address that question of that very strong reality? Because there are a lot of women in this situation, they still haven't had a relationship yet, but they know in their soul.
What's come to me in the last, and even I've been thinking about why, of course, there's all this shared history of 20 years, but why would it be so very hard to let go of this heterosexual relationship? And I think that the cultural conditioning of heteronormative relationships is so vast and so, so deep. It's extraordinary. I think that many women either were born gay or have been gay their whole life, but not even considered it because we are taught that the pinnacle is heterosexual relationship for a long time. And so we don't even open ourselves up to what also might be there. But I think maybe you've had the experience, I've certainly had the experience, when it's there, it's there. I thought all women were semi-attracted to other women. I really thought that was true. And I've checked it with a few of my friends and they've said, no, no, that's not true, Tress. And I definitely believe that it's a spectrum and a lot of people are bisexual or pansexual. I do believe in that. But I think once you know, you know. And I think that for myself, once I open the door just the teensiest little bit that this could be true, every day exponentially, yes, 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 until you're right, whether you had a physical relationship or not, you would know. Whether you could let yourself really admit it or act on it, or that's a longer process, I think.
So how are your kids doing?
My kids are fantastic. It's a different world. When we moved back from the States and they went to school, I was just curious what it was like for them. They had never been in school in the United States before. They'd always been at school abroad in international schools. I would just say to them sometimes at the end of the day, they'd come home and I'd say, oh, do you have any gay kids in your class? Yes, Mom. Oh, do you have any trans kids? Yes. And they were just so annoyed and bored by these questions because, of course, this is just the world they live in. In fact, my daughter came home in 4th grade and said, oh, my friend said she might be gay. I said, really? And she said, yeah. And I said to her, well, how could you know? We're only in 4th grade. And then all the other girls jumped down my throat and said, if she wants to be gay, that's totally fine. My daughter was so upset because she wasn't saying to her friend, it's not okay. She was just saying, how could you possibly know in 4th grade? So this was just part of her world in 4th grade, or I teach 4th and 5th grade. And there's a couple of kids in our class that are non-binary, one boy that is gay and dresses very flamboyantly. And I just love it that it's just par for the course in their class. But one day I came into school and about 6 of them had brought a frying pan. And I said to I teach writing. So I said to the homeroom teacher, why are there frying pans on your desk? And she said that these kids had brought frying pans to school to signify that they were pansexual in 5th grade. And they were ready to tell everybody all about it and identify like this. So this is the world my kids are coming from. So they seem to have taken everything in stride. My husband and I are still very good friends. We still have family dinners together and go on family walks. And I'm still living in our home part-time. So I think they have said, well, my life's not impacted that much yet. I've asked them if they have any questions about my sexuality, and they've said no, although they haven't told any of their friends. I was adamant that I was not going to tell them that I was dating anyone because I didn't want them to think that I was distracted in any way from them. But my son is in class with my girlfriend's son. And so he had seen me there and she was keeping it from him and she didn't want to and all this kind of business. So I decided to tell my son. So I said, Milo, how would you feel if I started dating? And he said, ooh, Mom, playa. I said, Milo. But anyway, so I told him about Eli and he actually looked at me and said, I'm so happy for you, Mom, which was amazing to me. So, I mean, I think everybody thinks their kids are great, but my kids, I think because we lived abroad, they have a maturity and a gravitas that maybe you just don't get the opportunity to develop if you haven't had to move 6 times and go to new schools and be with adults a lot. Both my husband and I are educators. And so they seem to be doing okay. And they're pretty annoyed that my husband and I keep asking them every day, are you okay? Do you want to talk about anything? And they will. I think that they probably can't even take it in all right now. But I mean, so far, knock on wood, they seem to be okay. And luckily, we are close. Both my husband has a close relationship with them and I have a close relationship with them in different ways.
I know that it's been a challenging 9 months. What stands out for you as maybe the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is guilt, is just feeling bad. And it's not even guilt because guilt just seems so self-centered. It took me a long time to stop laying in bed and wishing this weren't true. Even though when I think about, I know that Glennon Doyle has talked about her marriage was not the marriage she wanted for her daughter. That spoke to me very highly. And so I've thought the marriage that we had that was good enough with two people that are friends that don't fight, but who both singly felt lonely every day within their marriage. Well, why would I want that? And why would I grieve the end of that? But I do. There's the caretaking piece when I think about what I've quote unquote done to my husband and abandon him. That is very, very, very hard. I think my kids will be fine.
Yeah, you're probably turn a corner when he meets somebody.
And my friends have said, well, isn't it going to bother you when Peter starts dating? And I said, not in the least. I can't wait. That was another pebble on the, yes, I'm really queer side, because honestly, I would be so happy. And I want for him what I'm experiencing now with my girlfriend.
I'm going to break in here to share a brief personal announcement. In June 2020, I released the second edition of my book, Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty. It's based on several early episodes of my podcast, Brain Science, but you don't need any background in science to enjoy it. Given all the uncertainty caused by recent events, I hope readers will find the ideas more relevant than ever, because I feel very strongly that if people have a better understanding of how our brains really work, they could be more tolerant and compassionate toward themselves and others. Of course, you can buy Are You Sure? From your favorite bookseller, and I will include a link in the show notes. I stayed in my marriage, gosh, I can't even figure out how many years, because I figured out I was gay when we'd been married about 4 years, and we were married 38.
Oh, wow.
At least the last 20 years he knew.
Really?
I stayed because he didn't have anybody else. He was very much of a loner. He had his whole life centered on me.
Yeah.
And as I listen to you talk, I worry, was he really experiencing that loneliness that you just described?
You mean your husband?
My husband, yeah.
My husband was sleeping on the couch, quote unquote, because he snored.
Well, no, we slept in the same bed till the very end. And every time I woke him up for snoring, he would say, I'm not snoring.
But did you feel lonely? I did.
Yeah, in some ways, but he was always there. So sometimes I had more of I wish I could have some space, because for the last 7 years, he was retired and he never went anywhere.
Yeah. But do you know what else? And this was enormous for me to realize. I have a very healthy lifestyle. I meditate, I exercise, I eat good food, I'm vegetarian. I can bring myself joy and make myself happy. And I felt guilty 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for not giving my husband sex. I would be having a great day, and I think I love my job, because I really do love my job. I love my kids. I've got so much good in my life and so much abundance. And then there's like, but I'm not giving Peter what I know he wants most in the world. And I don't mean just sex. I mean all of it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
To have that weight lifted, that's huge. It's painful, but it's for the best for everybody.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I would like to share that this experience has taken more courage than I ever really knew I had. But already I can say, and I'm still in the messy middle, that it was the right thing to do. I just wrote in my journal a couple of days ago that all the years of trying to love myself and trying to accept myself, and I just couldn't, and I didn't know why. And suddenly now, I was just so busy and so exhausted trying to hide from myself and trying to stuff something down. All the pain of the last 9 months, and the pain that will continue, I'm sure, for a while, is worth it. And so I know, especially in the early days, I listened to podcasts and read books and read blogs about women who had come out of the other side and said, somehow try to find the strength to go forward. And so I would echo that message. Even for all the pain, I'm not sorry that this happened. And I'm so thankful that I realized what I realized. I do believe it is worth it, and it will be worth it. And I do believe that in the end, it will be the best thing for myself, my children, and my husband.
I want to thank Tress Ahles for sharing her story. It takes a lot of courage to share with people you don't even know, especially when everything is so raw and new. Every month, I'm amazed at the courage and resilience that you all show. One of the unique challenges of coming out later in life is that the decision affects so many people. Besides parents and siblings, there is often a spouse and children, and many struggle with the decision to leave marriages with people that they still love and respect. Tress gave voice to something I know many of you have experienced, the tension between the relief and joy that comes with discovering and accepting who you really are, and the guilt and grief about the life that must be left behind. I especially appreciated her candid discussion of the appeal of remaining in the heteronormative world and how assumptions about sexuality and gender make it difficult for us to be open to other possibilities. If you would like to give Tress direct feedback, you can do that within our new private group on MeWe.com. I'll tell you more about how to join in just a few minutes. I'm always looking for people who are willing to share their stories. Most people volunteer because they want to help others, and then they're surprised at how powerful the experience can be. If you want to share your story, just email me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com. Of course, I want to hear your feedback even if you don't want to share your own story. I'd like to hear how the show is helping you, what you'd like to hear in terms of guests and maybe books that you would like to share with other people, any ideas you have. You can also submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. And you can post to our Grain Rainbows Facebook fan page. I hope you will share this episode with others in whatever way feels comfortable for you. You can find the show notes for this episode as well as additional episodes at grainrainbows.com. And of course, subscribe in your favorite podcasting app for free. And maybe even leave a review. Remember, you can now sign up for the free Grain Rainbows newsletter either at the website or by texting Grain Rainbows, that's all one word with an A, to 33777. Grain Rainbows, all one word, to 33777. This will get you the show notes automatically via email. There are optional text messages which you may want to opt out of if you have limits on your messaging. I hope you will check out my book, Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty. This book explores the evidence that most of what our brain does is not accessible to our conscious awareness or control. But more importantly, it emphasizes the implications of this discovery. Obviously, we are living in very uncertain times, and my goal is to make a positive contribution to the conversation. You may be wondering what this has to do with coming out. Well, I encourage you to look for upcoming interviews that I've done with Rhodes Perry on The Out Entrepreneur and Rick Clemens on Life Uncloseted. I'll add the links to these interviews to the show notes when they go live. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about our Grain Rainbows community. First, the reminder that the private Facebook group is moved to MeWe.com. So if you need an invite, send me an email to grainrainbows@gmail.com. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then you can get an invite directly from MeWe. Admittedly, the privacy features that protect those that need it also mean that the group is growing very slowly. So don't give up. And don't forget, if you're already a member, you can invite others. Just look for the Invite Others button on the page. In the MeWe group, you can share your story in a safe space and hopefully receive feedback. If you're already a member, I encourage you to check in regularly and offer support to new members. Tress Ahles is a member, and that's why I encourage you to send her feedback inside the MeWe group, or you can even send her a private message. There are many other previous guests that are members of our MeWe group, so I encourage you to look for them and then maybe give them feedback, again, either within the group or by private message. Finally, I'm looking for volunteers to help moderate the MeWe group. Midge Noble did a great job on Facebook, but other obligations prevent her from continuing. If you're interested, just message me within the group or send me an email at grainrainbows@gmail.com. I'll be back next month with another episode. In the meantime, I hope you'll check out my book, Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty, as well as my other podcasts, Books and Ideas, and Brain Science. Thanks again for listening. I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Grain Rainbows is copyright 2020 to Virginia Campbell, MD. You may copy it to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grainrainbows@gmail.com.